All right, guys, today we are going to start to talk about the initial takeover of Africa by the European powers in order to gain things like wealth, resources, land, and then eventually, in their minds, power. So, as we get started in this lecture or this discussion, we need to talk about the fact that there are three very easy terms that you guys must know and understand. The first of those terms is the idea of ethnocentrism. Okay, ethnocentrism is the belief that your culture is better than all others in the world, that you are a far superior person than other people, that all others are inferior. And this really kind of fueled what was going on in Europe at the time, that they thought that they were superior to the Africans, and then they were doing them a favor by taking them over. If you guys remember from the video that we watched over the slave trade, when the one gentleman talked about the fact that the Europeans thought that they were there to civilize the Africans. It's a very important statement, and it was really fueled by this idea of ethnocentrism, that they were converting them to Christianity, that they were making them to be more like the Europeans. So therefore, this is a very, very important term. This is the first of those things that kind of sets up the whole ideas of the ideas of colonization of Africa for the Europeans. The second one is nationalism. Okay, and this nationalism can be a good thing. It also can be a bad thing. Depends upon how you kind of look at it. Nationalism is basically a strong devotions to one's country, and basically that means you think that your country is better than all the others in the world. So therefore, like I said before, it can be a good thing or a bad thing. The good side of the fact is you have a lot of pride in your country. A lot of people have a lot of pride in America's, but it also could be a bad thing. Is like when we use in terms of imperialism in Africa, when these European countries took over these areas, they were doing it for what was in the best interest of their country. So therefore, it was a very important, or it's a very important term for you guys to understand for that particular reason. So nationalism is really one of those things that you guys need to know and understand, because of the fact that it was used as an excuse for the Europeans to come in and take over areas in Africa. Like I said before, the effects of nationalism, you want to strengthen your own country, and you believe that your country is better than all of the other countries in the world. So therefore, it became, like I said, it can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing. It just depends upon what direction people take those ideas into. Imperialism. Now, this is the key to the whole thing here. This is the fact that the people wanted to start to build up an empire by controlling other lands that are technically weaker than them. The political cartoon on the right here, you guys can see that Cecil Rhodes, who's a very huge in the age of imperialism, is standing on a map of Africa. And you could, like I said, point out to you guys in the classes before, that he's almost like the puppet master of Africa, that he's controlling Africa because he was an imperialist. He wanted to take over Africa. He wanted to become wealthy because of Africa. He wanted to improve himself. He wanted to improve his country based on what was going on in Africa at the time. So therefore, Cecil Rhodes, imperialist, and he became, that is what imperialism is in terms of the fact that they wanted to conquer and take control. Like I said, an imperialist is a person that promotes imperialism for the well-being of their country, for the well-being of themselves. More often than not, it was more in the interest of the well-being of themselves than it was in terms of the well-being of the country. So, what did the Europeans get from this age of imperialism? Well, number one, they got huge profits for the Europeans. They were given raw materials, and they had exclusive trading rights with the particular regions. And as a result of that, like I said, people became more powerful, more wealthy as a result of this age of imperialism in Africa. What did the Africans get from the European colonization? As you can see, the snake over here on the right choking out the African gentleman is pretty self-explanatory there. They pretty much lost their traditional ways of life. They lost a lot of their they lost their freedom. They lost control of their land. They really didn't gain a whole lot because the Europeans were using them for their materials, for their resources, so on and so forth. So therefore, it was very important, or it's very important to understand what occurred on both sides, because this is going to kind of lead into what we're going to talk to as we start to see independence start to roll around. in Africa during the same time frame. So, or during a later time frame. Like I said before, the Europeans were there for the raw materials, and these raw materials are basically a product that has taken its most basic form and then transformed into something like cotton, rubber, oil, minerals like diamonds and gold, sugar, tea, coffee. We talked about salt, ivory, other things as well too. All of these things would kind of add up in terms of raw materials that were used by the Europeans in order to make themselves a little bit more wealthy as a result of it. The Berlin Conference, which you guys are going to read an article about sometime soon, as well as what we've been already talking about with the scramble for Africa. And this is the place in which France, Germany, Great Britain, Belgium, Italy basically kind of came together and divided up Africa. The only two countries that were basically free from that because they were too strong for the Europeans to come in and take over were Ethiopia and Liberia. But the one thing, if you guys look at that list of people, there is a group of people that is missing. And it's going to be one of those things that is going to cause some major issues in the future for the Europeans. And the group of people that are missing are obviously the Africans. The Europeans kind of came and divided up based on what they needed, what they wanted, but what you guys did in the classroom with the simulation, rather than, dividing along tribal lines or old traditional boundaries and everything else like that. So oftentimes, the Europeans had mixes of people that sometimes didn't get along with each other. Different borders were crossed that didn't make some of the Africans happy. So that's going to play a huge role in the future of Africa because there's going to be some major issues with some groups of people, and it's going to cause some tension. And when the Europeans leave, there's no longer anybody there to kind of stop these tensions from occurring. And as a result, what's going to take place there is going to be a situation in which people will start fighting, and it's just going to cause some major issues in the future, which we'll get into here in about a week or so. One of the major areas, and this is going to be our first case study, is the Congo Free State, and it was led by this guy, King Leopold II, which we've talked a little bit about before. If you guys remember the political cartoon we just looked at, he was the head of the snake around the African, and basically he set up his colony in the center of Africa to make him money. Okay, he didn't care what he was doing there to the people, didn't care what was going on within his colony. As long as they were making him money, he was happy. He was so cruel to these people that by about after 20 years, in terms of them being there, the population of the Congo fell and dropped by about one half. We're going to get into a lot of details about this here with our first case study, so I'm not going to get into too much more about this. But like I said, he and Belgium are one of the major players in Africa, and he was very much a prime example as to what cruelties took place in Africa during this time frame. The largest imperialists in the world, Great Britain, underneath the rule of Queen Victoria. In fact, it was said that the sun never sets in the British Empire, and you guys can see from this map here, all of the areas in pink were at one time controlled by Great Britain. So if the sun was down somewhere on the globe, it was up somewhere else on the globe, and then therefore it was shining somewhere on the British Empire, as you can see how much land they actually controlled in the world. We're going to talk a little bit more about Britain and their role, especially with India. So like I said before, this is just kind of a little tease to it, but it is one of those things that the British Empire did have the largest empire in the world, and it was the fact that it was so huge that there was daylight at some point in time on some portions of the British Empire. They also controlled things like the Suez Canal that linked the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean, which basically made it a shorter route. So therefore, they could charge taxes on these things for people to get from the Mediterranean to the Red Sea to India faster. And it just made, like I said, once again, one of those things that Britain controlled a lot of, and it made them a little bit more wealthy in the long run. And like I said before, with the Suez Canal, it wanted to shorten the route between Europe and India. So therefore, it was very important that they control this particular area of land. So, as I said before, things that you need to know, really know from this, is the three main vocab terms, what the Berlin Conference was, and what they did there. So this, as we talk about this, you really need to know those things. So if you guys missed that, please go back through that, jot those down somewhere. I'll be asking questions on Canvas about them too, so make sure that you know them. All right, talk to you more about it later.